So if you had to look at how people find curated and the people that reach out to us and Google searches, etc., with the exception of people actually looking up curated or we are curated or looking up my name, people look up Countach Turbo and curated Countach Turbo. And I would say, you know, we've told this story, I think, on VinWiki, but what a car that's so important to our brand and what we do in discovering and finding. And I wanted to sort of retell this story and elaborate on all of its details because it really is incredible. I was searching on Instagram, as I do. I look at different hashtags and, you know, I reach out to collectors and I'm probably giving away some of our secret sauce here, but I am pretty tenacious of reaching out to everyone I can when I see a Countach, Diablo, Mura, F40, XG220, EB110, whatever it may be, especially Countach's. And I saw it was a photographer taking photos at a storage facility of what appeared to be an early Countach. You could see as it had like a suede dash. So I reached out to the photographer really quickly and he said, yeah, it's at this storage facility. So I reached out to the storage facility like literally the next morning, and I reached a woman at the storage facility and I asked her if the Countach was for sale, and she said no. And unfortunately, I got a little discouraged and I said, okay, well, thank you very much. Can you tell me anything else about it? She said no, but she was pretty nice. So I hang up, and literally within maybe 4 or 5 hours, I forget if it was later that day or the next day, I got a call from a really nice gentleman. He was like the GM of this storage facility that was also a dealership. And he said, yes, we actually have 2 Countach's in storage. It's from a local sort of celebrity type character. And the cars are essentially like here in storage, but you never know, he might sell them. So he starts describing the one car to me, and I realized pretty quickly that it's not just an early Countach, but it's a very special Countach. Now, growing up, you always have sort of, you know, you're reading books and magazines and you remember certain iconic cars. And one of those cars for me and many, many Countach enthusiasts was the Countach Twin Turbo. And it's funny because it was almost like a mythological car. It was like a legendary car that no one had really seen. But the Lamborghini distributor, a very well-known guy, he was in part of the dealer network and the distributor for Switzerland, was a gentleman by the name of Max Bobnar, or MB Sports Cars, Max Bobnar Sports Cars. So Max was very well respected by Lamborghini. He had an incredible collection himself. I believe he had 1 or 2 Mura SVs. He had numerous Countach's. And in 1980, he purchased an LP400S, so one of the early low-body cars. And he decided to do something really awesome and twin turbo the car. Now, the turbos were made by a very well-known engineer that had built turbo kits for Koenig at the time and different tuners, sort of the famous German tuners of the 1980s. So the turbos were actually, they worked pretty well. And Max famously displayed this car. He used this car at events. There's famous photos of Ferruccio Lamborghini and Valentino Balboni standing next to the car, and the car was actually parked next to the Walter Wolf Countach. There's even a magazine spread where the car was a poster. It was on the cover of a book. They even made models of the car. So this car was very famous if you loved Countach's in the 1980s. So famous that we got tons of emails of people that just wanted to see the car because they remembered the car. So anyways, fast forward, I realized quickly, I'm on the phone with this gentleman. He's describing the long-lost Countach Turbo. So Max Bobnar actually made 2 Countach Turbo examples. The second car was a black-on-black car that's now famous. It's in a German Lamborghini museum. It's been in magazine articles, and it was well known where this car was. Now, if you Googled or looked on Wikipedia 2 to 4 years ago, it actually was said that the first Countach Turbo, this metallic red car, was actually destroyed, which was not the case. So I realized that this gentleman was describing the Countach Turbo to me. I told him, listen, even if the guy doesn't want to sell, I have to see this car in person. So I literally went online, I booked some plane tickets, and within 2 or 3 days, I was in Reno, Nevada, staring at this car. So I walk into this facility, and there was actually, you know, a Lotus Esprit Turbo, a Dodge Viper, some cool collector cars, nothing crazy. And then there was 2 Countaches sitting next to each other. There was a 1989 Countach 25th anniversary with, I believe it was around 400 kilometers or 400 miles. So it was basically an unregistered, brand new car on its original MSO. And sitting next to that car was this Countach Turbo. The first time I saw it, I was just extremely captivated. It was this stunning metallic red color over a contrast white interior, racing seatbelts, these incredible side skirts that made the car just look so wide and low. It said turbo massive on the side with these polished wheels with red centers. And I fell in love with the car. The car was actually very nice original condition. You could tell it had a bunch of little things that needed to be fixed. It had a dent, it had some scratches, and the car probably hadn't been serviced in years. But after looking at it, I realized so much was original. It had the original radar, the original radio, cassette player, original Pirelli tires, and I knew at that moment I had to own this car. It was a piece of history, and it looked the part. It looked like it came out in 1982, someone had put it away, and it was so cool. So what I found out was the car had actually been imported to the US by a very famous, you could say an icon in Reno, Nevada, Bill Pennington or William Pennington. Now, Bill Pennington was a famous guy because he actually started the Circus Casino. He was a very well-off sort of a developer as well, and he was known for sort of crazy campaigns. I think at one point he gave away a Ferrari, and he had great cars, and he was an icon in Lake Tahoe and that entire area. So he actually bought this Countach. He used to drive it around Reno, Nevada. He would listen to, at the time there was country western tapes and all these funny tapes that he would listen to, and apparently he'd drive pretty fast as well. So he'd owned this car for many, many years, and then at one point, he'd actually put them into his home. Now, I don't know the entire story, but he was friends with another casino / strip club owner who was in Reno, Nevada as well. Bill Pennington, I think, passed away in 2011, and this gentleman ended up with the cars. Now, he wasn't a huge car guy, but he was an interesting figure himself. He was a former Iranian Olympic medalist. He was like this good-looking, sort of well-built guy that loved these cars, and he actually kept both Countaches inside his house. They were sort of fixtures in his living room, which I remember seeing photos were so cool. And I think, you know, he never drove the cars. He probably just got tired of them over time. So I was basically up against negotiating with this guy. He loved the cars, but he probably wasn't a huge car enthusiast. Fast forward, we ended up negotiating for months and months and months, to the point where I even actually upset him at one point because I was trying to explain to him putting a value on a Countach Turbo was extremely difficult, and also putting a value on a Countach Turbo that maybe hadn't run properly in 10, 15 years was even more difficult. So I knew that there was going to be a lot of work that needed to be done. We ended up doing a lot of mechanical work to the car. After almost a year, I think it went on 2 years, we were finally able to come to sort of a meeting of the minds and purchase the car. We purchased both cars, the Anniversary and the Countach Turbo, and when the Countach Turbo arrived, it was like Christmas Day. I think everyone gathered around the car. We started it up. You could hear the turbo spool. It backfired, it popped, it cracked, but the car just sounded incredible. We hadn't really done any service work, and it just so happened that we're producing a major car event in Miami called the Miami Concours. And that year, Valentino Balboni was arriving to join us, and he was like a host of all the ceremonies. And Valentino remembered the car. He actually drove the car in period, and he knew Max Bobnar, and obviously. So I thought, wow, how cool would it be to get Valentino Balboni behind the wheel of the Countach Turbo again? What a marketing exercise. He just jumps on the highway. Now, this is a car that probably was pretty sensitive and temperamental in its day, and probably hasn't had gaskets or seals or anything done in 20 or 30 years, just had been unearthed out of a storage facility. And Valentino Balboni is pushing this car. I think we have a video and you can even see the boost gauges pump up and the car's quick. He's driving it really hard. And all I can think as I'm chasing this Countach is, oh my God, I hope it doesn't blow up.
Still an exciting car, huh?
It sure is.
So anyways, it was an incredible experience. It was an honor for Valentino to drive the car. We ended up getting it back, cleaning it up, doing a service. And we had a ton of interest. We had a guy, and I'll never forget this, he called me. He was a Countach collector. He had 2 or 3 Countaches. He had a Vector, he had a slant nose Cabriolet, so he had some iconic 80s cars. And he called me and he said, I have to see this car. He said, the whole reason I started collecting Countaches was I was looking for this actual car. I have the magazine, I have the poster. And I actually asked another historian to find me this exact car. Ironically, he flew in, he fell in love with the car, but he didn't know how to explain to his wife that he was gonna buy a 3rd Countach, or maybe it was a 4th Countach. So we ended up not coming to a deal. We stayed in touch. He's a great guy. He's got some incredible cars. And slowly people would call us, and we weren't even sure if we wanted to sell the car. We ended up talking to a dear friend of mine who started a company called Rally Road, and they sell shares of assets. So they'll sell you 10% of a vintage Ferrari, or 100% of the first Batman comic ever made. Very cool concept. I think they're registered with the SEC, and it's been very successful. So we had become friendly. We had sold them or helped them find some other cars. And one day we were talking and he said, well, what else do you think is really interesting? And I said, honestly, one of the most interesting cars I've ever come across is this Countach Turbo. The next day he called me and said, we have to do it. So we decided to actually sell Rally Road the car. And it was probably one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made. To this day, everyone I encounter asks us about the Countach Turbo, asks us about discovering the car. I think the entire story, from finding it on an Instagram photo, chasing the storage facility, finding out it was one of 2, finding out, no, the car wasn't destroyed, it doesn't get better than that. I actually have thought about maybe trying to buy it back one day or something like that. But I think right now it's with the right platform, it's with the right people. I'd hopefully love to see it again one day, drive it, maybe buy it back one day. But it's definitely one of the best stories and best cars that's ever come into Curated.